It is an OG MEDAROT stemming back all the way to the days of MEDAROT 1 where it all began. It is the musical instrument type, SNG00 Volume 10, with a kit of Napalm, double guard 300, float legs, and the leg ability of Hoplite, which buffs his leg shoot and melee resist stats for every defense part equipped on the build. Now, as another OG and veteran from the really early days where MEDAROT first began 25 years ago to date, it is wonderful to see another OG and veteran get an amazing glow up with a new model and a fresh look, and interestingly enough, keep almost the exact same kit he had when he first began. Of course, with a couple minor changes here and there, and of course a new leg ability to complement his already very interestingly well-built defensive kit. Napalm, and his only form of combat, is a gunpowder-based shooting attack, meaning it is a scattered AoE, and it will damage one part normally, and then two others at random at 1/3 damage. His right and left arm of Guard 300 is his primary form of versatility on the field as a defender, but simply put, while Volume 10 is on the line, he will intercept any and all incoming attacks, and also cut about 300 damage off the top when mitigating it, relying largely on his legs shoot and melee resist to negate a lot of the base damage that would be incoming. Now, normally, I tend to guard a lot of bots that use Guard 300, Guard 500 a little harshly in some cases, given the fact that there's usually much better shields you can use, such as Shoot Guard, Perfect Guard, or anything of the like. But even in current meta where those are actually becoming very easy to counter, even shields like this actually have very solid use, and if you can stay defensive enough and have high enough damage reduction, you can actually make these work. And just to touch on that too for just a moment, with a float type leg, that does grant Volume 10 very solid coverage across pretty much every terrain at A rank across the board, which is 10% to all stats, except of course Cyber, where everybody gets 20. But just touching on his stats as well briefly, with a leg mobility of 652, that's actually above normal tier than what you'd expect of a normal float leg. But this also is not factoring his 10% that he would get for any terrain that he's on, nor does it count the Hoplite effect once it activates. But just looking at his base stats for a moment, a melee resist of 973 isn't too shabby. Not super high, but he can keep incoming melee damage moderately low to a point. Shoot resist of 1171 is just a little bit better, so he's going to be he's going to have a lot easier time tanking hits from afar more than up close. And with an evade of 560, not super great, but we do also have to remember that Volume 10's role on the field is not to dodge or graze, but simply to stand as a stalwart wall and protect his allies. So in this case, the really low evade actually you shouldn't have to worry about too much, if at all, because dodging and grazing, as mentioned, is not his primary role. Now, if we were to count for a moment his leg ability factoring in with these stats, at fully capped 5-star, that's about another 25% to each stat while he's on the field for every defense skill activated, which means with 2 skills as a pure set, he's already going to be packing a solid 50% bonus to both his melee and his shoot resist before any terrain compatibility or passive MEDAROT bonus. And on the topic of his stats too for just a moment, head HP at about 3400, arms at about 4600 each is honestly really, really good. And as a defender, that means he can definitely take a blow pretty well without it easily crippling him, especially since he's going to be very passively and normally diverting damage to his arms to keep his overall damage low. But even then, like I said, he can hold himself moderately well, and like I said, I normally tend to grade shielders like this one a little harshly, but Volume 10 actually makes it work to a point, and I'm moderately impressed how well he does. That being said, as a pure set score, I do honestly have to rate Volume 10 a pretty solid 7 out of 10. Even though, like I said, I don't care too much for Guard 300 or Guard 500, in the current ever-shifting meta where shoot and melee guard are basically curbed just by charging and spamming Metaforce, Guard 300 and 500 actually start to take a little bit more of a rise in current meta as a shield that's a little easier to counter or buy yourself those extra turns without forcing Metaforce spam. And on top of that, having the very high HP pool, and then of course all that damage reduction going into his legs from a multitude of different places and conditions, honestly makes him for a very solid and tanky defender if you choose to use him. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a hair higher at about a 7.5 out of 10. primarily for the fact that as a pure set, he actually works very well and has very solid synergy with himself. But because he's only using 2 defense skills out of the 3 that you could possibly cap out at, you're not quite using the Hoplite leg ability to its full potential. That being said, if you could maybe exchange the head for another defense-based part that is non-heavy, such as a basic shield or something of the like, you could probably capitalize on a much better damage reduction overall that'll keep the parts much healthier on the field and keep damage even lower as long as he's on the line. Now, it is also worth noting with shields, just to bear in mind, that anyone that uses no defend or deathlock, of course, will cancel these, and because it is a basic guard, it can also be canceled very easily or cut through with destroy just as easily as well.